These two little brothers are named Guido and Rocco. They never argue and always stick together. Their dad got them both bikes to play with, but their joy didn't last long. A couple of years later, their parents split up and the brothers had to split up too. Guido went with their mom and Rocco stayed with their dad. 30 years went by, and one afternoon, while Rocco was fixing a tractor, he got a call from a nurse saying his father was really sick, so he hurried home. That night, in his room, after his father's condition improved, his father lit a cigarette and smoked, even though he had terminal-stage lung cancer. In bed, while taking a drag, his father held Rocco's hand and asked him to come closer. Then, in a quiet voice, he said he needed to pee. Rocco was a little disappointed, thinking his father was about to say something important. He then went to the toilet to get the potty. When Rocco came back from the bathroom with a potty for his dad to go pee, he was completely shocked to discover that his dad had passed away in his bed. The next day, after Dad's funeral, Rocco was getting ready to give a speech when his long-lost brother Guido surprisingly showed up. He caused a scene in the church when everyone was trying to be solemn. As Guido went in for a hug, Rocco, already overwhelmed by their dad's passing, snapped and grabbed him by the throat. They ended up getting into a full-blown brawl in front of everyone. After having a good fight, the two watched their dad's body being cremated. That night, Guido told Rocco that he had to go to work out of town the next morning. Rocco wasn't bothered by it at all. Then he handed their father's will to Guido. Guido sat in the room, reading the letter in silence. The letter said that their dad couldn't forgive Guido for choosing to live with their mom instead of him, but in his old age, his dad realized that no matter how much he hated it, he would always love Guido and hope he would come home. As a final request, his dad wanted Guido and Rocco to scatter his ashes on their mom's grave. After reading the letter, Guido headed out to meet up with Rocco. They had a few drinks and talked about their dad's request from earlier. They didn't want it to be a boring hangout, so they decided to chat and play some table tennis. At first, everything was as before. Rocco wasn't really into playing with his brother, but as time passed, he started feeling more competitive and played harder. In the end, they made up for lost time and had a great time together. Once they were out of breath from playing, they plopped down under the table and looked at the list of things they used to want to do when they were kids. They said they'd go on adventures, meet lots of girls, score free grub at restaurants, have run-ins with biker gangs, party all night long, chow down at Chinese joints, and most importantly, do it all together. During their conversation, Guido mentioned that before he left the next day, he really wanted to go through with one of the plans they had made, like just taking a walk around the city, nothing too crazy. After persistent persuasion from Guido, Rocco finally agreed to join in. They hopped on the cool little bike that had been souped up into a motorbike, got everything ready, and then their adventure kicked off. They had a blast rolling around the city and laughing all night without getting any sleep. It didn't take long for their previously strained relationship to become tight again. In the morning, while riding his bike, Guido started to feel sleepy and ended up swaying and falling. When Rocco tried to help, Guido insisted that he save their father's ashes, which had fallen out of his bag. Turns out, Guido only invited Rocco out last night as an excuse to get him to come to France. Their mother's grave was there, and Guido wanted to fulfill their father's last request. Rocco was furious that Guido had lied. Seeing his brother upset, Guido decided to leave him alone, but Rocco ended up following him. He said he wanted to fulfill their father's will too, so he decided to come along. The two brothers continued their adventure to France and spent the journey joking and racing with their bikes. In the afternoon, while we were at a restaurant, Guido showed Rocco that he had grabbed a dead bug from the road and said since they agreed to go on an adventure like they had planned when they were kids, he wanted to do everything on the list. With a sneaky grin, Guido put the bug in the food and then complained to the restaurant owner about it, but the plan didn't work because a chef saw Guido put the bug there. Guido was so embarrassed that he quickly paid the bill. Later that evening, they just chilled out at the hotel. The next morning at breakfast, Guido told Rocco that he had an important meeting at his office in the afternoon, so he couldn't continue the trip. Rocco wasn't surprised at all, as he knew his brother's character. From the beginning, he was sure that Guido wouldn't take their father's request seriously. Rocco said goodbye and left first, but on his way, Guido caught up and said that he had canceled his meeting. After a full day of riding their bikes, Guido and Rocco stopped for a break at a cafe. While they were there, they ran into two gorgeous women. To try and impress them, Guido and Rocco bragged about their dancing skills. When the women asked them to show off, they busted out some silly childhood dance moves. Even though they looked totally ridiculous, their confidence made everyone at Cafe crack up and eventually join in. They ended up impressing the two women after all. In the evening, at the inn, Guido asked Rocco why he was still single, even though he used to be a hit with the ladies when he was young. Rocco said he didn't have time for dating. There were a lot of things Guido didn't know about. Rocco then revealed that their father wasn't just battling lung cancer. Before their mother and Guido left, their father was already struggling, not just physically, but mentally too. Since the divorce, their father had been getting worse. Their dad, who had never smoked, started drinking and smoking. Because of that, Rocco didn't have time to focus on his own future. He just wanted to take care of his father because he was the only family he had left. He didn't want to leave his dad who needed him. After hearing his brother's story, Guido became silent and felt guilty. The next day, as they were traveling, they decided to grab some food at a Chinese restaurant. Guido went ahead and ordered everything on the menu. He even asked Rocco to join in and order as much as he wanted, but Rocco declined, not wanting to waste any food if he couldn't finish it all. A few minutes later, Guido's orders started showing up one after the other. Despite his brother's refusal, Guido kept trying to convince him to at least give a shot. And eventually, Rocco caved and started taking small bites, then more and more, until he couldn't resist stuffing his face with the delicious food. Their table was piled high with food, and they just kept on eating and having a great time together. After stuffing their faces with the food they ordered, in the afternoon, on their way to the next spot, they bumped into a couple who needed a lift to a party. Once they arrived, Guido and Rocco were welcomed to join in on the fun. They ended up partying all night long, and they were so pumped that they got totally wasted. During the party, Rocco told Guido that he really wanted to have a kid. Guido surprised him by saying he already had a child. Rocco felt jealous and angry and went to sit by himself under a tree. He thought about how he could have left his father to live with his mother and Guido, but he knew he couldn't do that. In his drunken state, Rocco grabbed his father's ashes and scattered them there. The next day, Rocco freaked out when he woke up and realized his dad's ashes were missing. He quickly grabbed them from a nearby campfire before Guido could find out, and they kept on with their journey. Rocco asked Guido what his child looked like when they stopped at a restaurant to have dinner. Guido was unsure how to respond, so he explained that his ex-girlfriend had sent a letter after they broke up, saying she had just given birth to his baby. He found out she had been pregnant before they split. The letter only mentioned that the baby was a boy named Luca, who might be 18 now. Guido really wanted to meet his son, but didn't know what to do when they finally met. Rocco said they just needed to meet and figure things out from there. So they decided to visit Guido's ex's house. The next day, when they got to Guido's ex's house and Rocco was about to ring the doorbell, Guido's ex came out with Luca. Since Guido was nervous, they just followed from a distance. In the park, Rocco and Guido chilled while watching Luca and his friends play soccer. Since they were bored, Rocco asked Guido if he wanted to jump in and join the game with them. After playing soccer, they hung out with Luca and his buddies. Guido heard his son tell him a funny story for the first time and really enjoyed spending time with him. Even though Luca didn't know Guido was his real dad, Guido was still really happy. He didn't want to seem down, so he said goodbye. But before he left, he asked Luca for a cigarette. That night, once they were done dealing with their dad's ashes, Rocco asked Guido if he would see his son again. Guido said it wasn't Rocco's concern, and they ended up arguing. During the argument, Guido brought up their parents' divorce, and they started blaming each other. Rocco got mad when Guido accused him of causing their parents' divorce, so he stormed off. The next day, while Rocco was out riding his bike, Guido caught up to him. Rocco didn't pay much attention to him at first, but after spending some time together on the road, they started getting along again. Later that day, while they were grabbing some food at a cafe, they started joking around with a couple of bikers who were playing table tennis. The bikers then dared Guido and Rocco to a game of table tennis. If they lost, they would cough up 500 euros, but if they won, they would get both Rocco and Guido's bikes. They didn't start the game too well, but then they caught up and got the score to deuce. But then at the last second, Rocco hit the ball really hard and it didn't even bounce on the table, giving the points so the bikers won the match. After Rocco and Guido handed over their bike keys, the bikers started making fun of them until things got physical and they ended up fighting. It was obvious that the bikers were way stronger than Rocco and Guido. After the fight, Rocco and Guido hit up the public bathroom to clean up their cuts. Rocco was like, "We got to get our bikes back," so they decided to pay the bikers a little visit. When they got to the place, not far from there, Rocco snuck in through the toilet and grabbed their bike's keys. A dog caught him, but he stopped it from barking. Then, as they were about to leave, a biker caught them and they were chased. Guido had to ditch his bike during the chase. A biker even shot a bow and arrow at them, almost hitting Guido. They escaped by jumping off a hill and had a rough landing. Eventually, they continued on their journey, riding Rocco's bike. After a while, they finally made it to their mom's grave. When they were about to spread their dad's ashes, Guido was puzzled because it smelled weird. Rocco casually explained that the guy at the crematorium said people with cancer can have that smell. Luckily, Guido bought the explanation. After they spread their dad's ashes, they said bye. It was a quick and easy trip, but for them who hadn't seen each other in years, it was really nice. Finally, they checked off something from their childhood bucket list. They hugged and cried, and Guido begged his brother not to leave him again as he was his only family. Rocco smiled at that. That night at the train station, Guido was really confused. He couldn't stop thinking about what Rocco had said about Luca, so the next morning he made up his mind to go see his son. When Luca opened the door for Guido at the apartment, he knew right away that Guido had to be his dad. He didn't ask many questions and just let Guido come in. Because of a part of their dad's will, good stuff happened to Guido and Rocco. After not seeing each other for 30 years, they were able to be happy and have a good laugh together again. But little did Guido know, the letter wasn't actually from their dad. It was from Rocco, written in his own handwriting to tell Guido that he wanted to hang out like they used to when they were kids.